The camellias will bloom again, a quiet story of letting go, remembering softly, and finding solace in the gentle rhythm of ordinary days after love has gone. The day he left, the rain didn't fall in torrents. It wasn't stormy. The sky was just gray, the kind of gray that settles over rooftops and makes everything look a little more tired. He walked out carrying 2 bags and a jacket slung over one shoulder. The door closed behind him without a sound. It had been repaired a few months before, so it no longer creaked when opened or shut. That silence reminded me of the change I'd forgotten. I stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of lukewarm tea that had long lost its steam. Outside, the camellias leaned in the breeze, their red petals tenacious. A few had fallen onto the porch, soft and silent. At first, the house didn't feel any different. The scent of fabric softener lingered faintly, blended with the dull trace of coffee. The uneven ticking of the living room clock continued its slow rhythm. Nothing had shifted in an obvious way. But as the hours moved, so did the shape of the absence. It wasn't just the empty space where a person should be. It existed in the untouched chair, the missing shoes by the door, and the silence in the hallway that once carried the sound of early footsteps. There hadn't been a fight, no shattered plates or shouted words. It had dissolved quietly, like steam fading from a kettle left to cool. Perhaps it started on an idle afternoon when I sat alone on the balcony, and he stayed inside, or on a night when he turned off the light before I'd reached the room. Stillness followed him out. It wasn't painful nor liberating. It was like living inside a room that was only half lit, not quite dark, not quite warm. I didn't cry that first night. I folded the laundry, fed the cat. I watched the news, though the words never settled in my mind. I brushed my teeth and turned off the light, lying down at the usual time. The space beside me felt larger than it had ever been. Morning came without ceremony. I moved through the motions, set twos, and then realized one wasn't needed. The unused one went back to the shelf without hesitation. I ate breakfast in silence, tasting little. The spoon felt unnecessarily heavy. The days moved on, quiet and contained. I returned to work, answered messages, and offered polite smiles. No one probed too deeply. Those who noticed the shift in me didn't mention it. I began avoiding our shared room, slept on the couch. The bed remained too whole, like a photograph that hadn't faded. The couch was smaller, uncomfortable in its own way, but easier to bear. On weekends, I cleaned. I found corners I hadn't touched in years. Beneath the bed, a box of photographs waited. There we were on the beach, bundled in coats, crouched on the floor eating noodles from the pot. No flood of emotion met me, just quiet recognition of lives once shared. One photo stood he was reaching to fix my scarf. I looked cold, maybe tired, but content. We had been younger, edges softer. I set it aside without purpose. It simply caught my attention. I started walking in the evenings, small loops through familiar streets. I passed the bakery we used to frequent. The owner gave a brief nod. I returned it. The scent of warm bread floated through the air, but I kept walking. The camellia bush shed more petals each morning. I swept them patiently, more out of habit. It gave the day structure. A child once pointed at the bush, her voice carrying curiosity I couldn't make out. Her mother answered, guiding her gently away. I watched them disappear around the bend and returned inside. I didn't miss him loudly. The ache came like the absence of a hum. The moment you realize a refrigerator has stopped running. Sometimes I reached for my phone, instinctively wanting to share something small. A bird on the windowsill, a strange sign at the bus stop. Then the realization there was no one on the other end. One Sunday, I entered the bedroom. The bed was neatly made, untouched. The scent of his cologne remained in the sheets. I opened the window, changed the pillowcases, and folded the blanket. There was no ceremony to it, just movement, steady and deliberate. Some items remained, a scarf, a half-read book. I placed them in a drawer not for remembrance, simply to remove them from view. Memory returned in fragments. The early years drifted into my mind. We had shared space on the floor before furniture arrived. He would press his cold hands against my neck in winter, laughing when I recoiled. We used to split grocery bags evenly, both too stubborn to carry less. We had been happy. Not perfectly, not always, but enough. Enough to build something. The sadness that lingered wasn't anger or guilt. It was the residue of something deeply shared. Something that had simply come to its quiet end. Not every goodbye was a wound. Some were soft closures. That fall, I trimmed the camellia bush. It had grown unruly, reaching out in uneven patterns. I cut it back with care, not certain I was doing it right, but trying anyway. By the end, it stood cleaner, lighter. Winter brought its usual chill. I unpacked heavier blankets, changed the curtains, and lit the hallway heater. The house settled into its colder self. I still took my walks, now bundled in a thicker coat. The streets were quieter, and I found comfort in that hush. Small things began to return, the way the sun warmed the floor through the window, the gentle tap of rain on the roof, the feel of warm tea in both hands. They didn't shout, they whispered. One evening I made his favorite meal, not out of longing, The recipe had simply come to mind. I ate slowly. The taste is familiar, grounding. He no longer visited my thoughts daily. The drawer with his things remained. I opened it from time to, not to mourn, just to get something else. The contents no longer struck me. They were just items now, quiet remnants of a past chapter. Spring returned gently, not with fanfare, but with the kind of slow unfurling that makes you notice the air changing before you see it in the trees. The camellia bush, though trimmed, began to bloom again. The flowers weren't as abundant as before, but the petals that came were soft, healthy, and tinged with alar red, less striking, more serene. I swept the fallen ones as I had done all winter, but now with a quieter presence in myself. Not mechanical, not melancholy. Just be steady. The apartment had softened too. The corners no longer echoed with what was missing. They simply existed, holding dust and light in equal measure. I opened more windows as the weather warmed, letting the space breathe. The rooms no longer felt like waiting rooms. They belonged to me again, filled with new stillness that didn't ache. I played music while cleaning, hing loud, instrumentals, old records, pieces that didn't press but drifted. I moved from room to room with a kind of rhythm that had taken months to find. There was no destination, only motion, only care. The couch where I had spent so many nights gave way once more to the bed. I began sleeping there again, at first without reason, just one night and then another. It no longer felt like a monument to absence, just a bed, with warm sheets and a view of the window. The breeze through the slightly open pane brought in the scent of morning dew, and I let it linger. Some weekends I took the longer path on my walks. I began noticing details I had ignored. The cracks in the sidewalk shaped like branches, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, and the way shadows moved at different hours. The streets held memories, yes, but they also held the present, which now felt less like an echo and more like a page turning. I passed the cafe again, the one where we used to sit by the window. The tables were mostly empty. I stepped inside this time, drawn not by nostalgia, but by a quiet urge for warmth. I ordered something familiar, sat down by the glass, and watched the world unfold beyond it. The seat across from me remained vacant, but it didn't call attention to itself. It was just a seat, just a part of the scene. In time, the drawer I once approached with hesitation became like any other. I no longer avoided it, nor did I linger. The scarf, the book, the few pieces left, they no longer carried weight. They remained, but their purpose had shifted. They no longer held him, they no longer held me. I redecorated one corner of the living room. Nothing, just a new plant, a framed print, and a small lamp. These changes were quiet statements, not of reinvention, but of re-inhabiting a space that had grown hollow. Slowly, it filled again. Mornings became gentler. I brewed tea I hadn't tried before, experimenting with flavors. I sat by the window with my mug, watching light spill onto the floorboards. The silence was no longer something I fought against. It was something I met halfway. There were still moments that brushed against memory, the smell of certain food, the rhythm of a song we once both liked. But they passed through like wind, touching but not unsettling. I didn't resist them. I let them arrive and leave, just as they were meant to. I began writing lists again, small plans, grocery items, things to read, places to visit someday. They weren't declarations, just intentions. The kind that spoke to a life continuing not in defiance of the past, but alongside it. The cat grew more affectionate with time, curling beside me on the bed, nudging my arm during quiet evenings. Her presence was steady, undemanding. A reminder that care still flowed through the house in quiet ways. A few friends started inviting me out again. Sometimes I joined. Other times I declined. There was no pressure, no performance, just small reconnections, rebuilt slowly. I smiled more not because I was trying to feel better, but because it felt natural again. I gave away a few of his things, not all at once, and not with ceremony, just as the need arose. The drawer grew lighter, the shelves shifted. The apartment slowly molded itself around one person again. The camellias, in their second bloom, seemed to mirror the rhythm of my days. They came and went without drama, dropping petals like soft punctuation marks on the passage of time. I swept them still, but now with quiet satisfaction. There was a comfort in tending to something that responded so gently. Rain came again, soft and persistent. I listened to it at night without the old ache. It was just weather now, just part of the season's turning. There was no need for closure in the dramatic sense. No final chapter with sharp edges. What had ended had done so long ago with the kind of slow unraveling that leaves no mess behind, only space. One evening, I returned from a walk and paused in front of the mirror. Not to look for change, but simply to see. My face was the same in many ways, but the expression had settled. The tension I hadn't known I carried was gone. I brewed tea and carried it to the bedroom. Sat on the edge of the bed, not with longing, but with ease. I reached for a book, the one I had read and put down months ago. I started again from the beginning. The words landed differently this time. The air through the open window was cool. The camellia bush outside was quieter now, its petals fewer. But it would bloom again. That much was certain. It would continue, whether I watched or not. The seasons would keep turning. The days would stretch, then shrink. The light would change its angle. Some mornings would be easy, others less so. But I would rise for each of them. The past didn't vanish. It simply stopped calling out. And in its place there was room again for the quiet joy of ordinary days, for the softness of stillness, for the slow, gentle blooming of something new.